Have you ever dared to defy an entire village just to protect your freedom? Right in the middle of her wedding, a young woman named Amina pulled back her veil and said, "I do not agree." In that moment, her parents turned away. Her neighbors whispered, "Shame." And the man she was forced to marry? He raised his hand in rage, but the one who stepped in wasn't a hero on horseback. It was Jahlani, a quiet woodcutter who lived alone in the forest. He simply said, "She will come with me." And in his humble hut, he asked for nothing. No vows, no conditions, only a warm meal, a mended roof, and silent kindness. This is based on a true story that traveled through the villages of East Africa, a love that never needed a wedding to be real. In just 1 minute, you'll discover how a simple hut became a shelter for dozens of abused women, and how love without demand became a legacy of healing. Amina was once seen as a disgrace. Jahlani, a broken man who lost his child before birth. But by choosing to stay, not for duty, but for freedom, they taught an entire village what real strength looks like. If you've ever watched someone suffer in silence, don't scroll past this, because one quiet act of defiance can change everything. For generations, the drum stops on a breath like a held blade. Dust floats in the noon light, a glittering fever above the packed earth of the village yard. Calabashes ring with the last tremor of music. Someone coughs. A goat pulls at its rope and stills. The diviner lifts his staff, its cowrie shells whispering. His eyes fix on Amina. Her palms are damp. The oil on her wrist smells of crushed lemongrass and smoke. The veil is light but heavy on her breathing. Through it, the world blurs into gold and heat. She can see only fragments, the flare of a crimson wrapper, the white of a shell necklace, the shine of sweat on Biko's temple. Beyond the wedding canopy, the acacia throws a thin shade. Flies graze the lip of a clay pot. The yard waits. On the front bench sit Nuru and Safira. He wears his best tunic, the indigo faded at the elbows but pressed flat with care. His jaw is clenched. A vein beats in his neck like a small drum. Safira's scarf is tied too tight. It has slipped back from her hair. She keeps smoothing her skirt as if wrinkles were a kind of sin. Their eyes are on their daughter, and then not. Their hands are folded in their laps, knuckles pale, knuckles still. Behind them, the village gathers in its festival colors, a sea of familiar faces turned into one great watcher. The diviner asks the final question, the one everyone knows by heart. Do you accept? The wind dies. Even the flies hold still. Amina meets Biko's gaze, close enough to see the thin scar between his brows, the way he smiles without softening his eyes. Close enough to remember the first time he came to their threshold with his swagger and his promise, how her father's back straightened, how her mother's shoulders fell. Close enough to feel the band of fear on her ribs. She says, no. Her voice is quiet, but it lands like a stone in water. One sound, then rings widening. The rings reach the drummer, who doesn't breathe. They reach the women behind the mortar, hands frozen around wooden pestles. They reach the child with a string of beads, the beads slipping from his fingers. The beads rolling, rolling until one drops into the crack by the post and disappears. The canopy trembles. A murmur threads the crowd, thin at first, then thick as rain. No, she said no. It must be a joke. She said no to a man who brought cattle and cloth and salt. She said no after the kola nuts were broken, after palm wine poured, after Nuru took the gifts and blessed them with his silence. She said no at the very end, at the point of no return. Biko's smile becomes a line. He turns to the diviner as if the old man holds some secret lever that can reset the day. But the cowries on the staff do not move. The old man's eyes shift to Nuru and Saphira. The yard turns, the whole village pivoting toward the two faces in the front row. For a heartbeat, Amina believes her father will stand, will place himself between her and the man beside her. She sees it, the way he stood once when a trader tried to short him in the market, the way his voice filled the space, slow and firm. She sees her mother's quick hands, how they would pluck thorns from a child's foot, how they would cup Amina's cheek in the starlight when fever burned. She believes because belief is a stubborn light that refuses to die even after you've learned the dark. Nuru turns his face away. Saphira lowers her head. The scarf shadows her eyes. Her hands do not move. A sound rises from the benches behind them, a low hive buzz of opinion. They accepted the bride price. The council will fine them if they return it. Who will repay the cattle? Who will feed the men who came with him? Shame to waste food. Shame to waste a day chosen by the calendar. Shame. The word passes from mouth to mouth like a contagious breath. The drummer finally exhales. The drum answers with a dull thud, not a rhythm, just a flinch. Biko steps closer. The space between his body and Amina's becomes thin as a thread. Heat lifts from the earth. The smell of dust and sweat and smoked fish folds around her. His fingers touch her elbow, and even that small pressure feels like a lock clicking. "I'll say it again," he murmurs, smiling for the crowd. People misheard. The diviner's staff ticks once against the cane mat. Cowries cough in the heat. The old man does not repeat the question. Amina sees the ridge of scar again. She sees a little tremor there. She knows that tremor. She has seen it in the faces of men who boast before a drum and beg behind a door. She looks past Biko toward the bench where her parents sit, hunting for some small sign, a twitch of a finger, a breath that means enough. But Nuru is studying the ground as if it holds arithmetic. Saphira's scarf has slipped a little more. She pulls it forward as if that cloth could shield her from what her daughter is doing. The goats in the pen bleat. A dog barks once and mistakes the meaning of the day. "I heard myself," Amina says. Her lips are dry. The word tastes like metal. She tastes her own fear and does not spit it out. No, there is no music to catch her. No voice rises in her defense. The laughter that breaks at the edge of the yard is not kind. A woman whispers to another, "Who will marry her after this?" A man whispers back, "Maybe she wants to marry her own pride." Someone says, "She thinks herself a man." Someone else says, "A man paid for her." Paid. The word falls on Amina like a thrown stone. The shells on the diviner's staff glint. The shells are empty homes of small lives. She wonders what the sea sounds like when you hold 1,000 shells to your ear. She wonders how loud a village is when it chooses silence. Biko's fingers slip from her elbow, then close again, higher on her arm. Not hard, not yet. Possession disguised as guidance, like a smile made of teeth. "Enough," he says pleasantly, to the air, to the watching faces. A mistake was made. He turns his head toward Nuru, an easy tilt of respect. "Baba, speak to her." Nuru's lips part. His tongue touches the gap where a tooth used to be. He could speak. He knows the words to clean this moment and make it walk on 2 legs. But there is the weight of cattle on his conscience. There are bundles of cloth in the back room, folded and bright. There are men in Biko's compound counting on a feast. There is the tax he owes the council. There is the year the rains failed, and pride became a lean thing that eats its own tail. There is a daughter before him who was once small as a fist and full of laughter and questions. He shuts his mouth. He lets the air pass through without catching it. Saphira's eyes never lift. One tear hangs in the corner like a small star and does not fall. The old man with the staff clears his throat, the sound dry as a broom. The word has been said. He looks older now, as if the refusal leached years from him. He raises his hand to the drummer. Biko moves faster than the drum. The smile vanishes. His palm rises and comes down across Amina's cheek with a sound that cuts the yard in half. The crack of skin on skin freezes the nearest flies in midair. It makes the dog off to the side yelp once and flatten. It makes the child with the beads hiccup and forget to breathe. Time hitches. Amina's head turns. Heat floods her face, a shock that blooms into pain. Her veil slips and clings to her mouth like a hand. She tastes dust. She tastes salt. She hears her own blood in her ears, a dark drumbeat that belongs to no celebration. The earth tilts under her sandals. For a heartbeat, she is only a body refusing to fall. No one steps forward. It is amazing how many bodies can hold still at once. How an entire village can become an arrangement of statues under a sun that shows everything. Men adjust their wrappers. Women press their lips together. The diviner lowers his staff a finger's width and then holds it there, as if the staff weighs a new kind of weight. Biko's chest rises. He looks around as if to ask, "Did you see that? Do you see who is in charge of a day that tried to slip its leash?" A smile crawls back to his mouth. Not warmth, just a shape learned from other men in other yards. Amina does not cry, not yet. Her eyes burn but hold it. She has the odd thought that if she cries now, the tears will be counted like coins, proof of payment, proof of purchase. "Come," Biko says, and this time his hand is not a guide. It is a grip, fingers around bone, full ownership. Her feet move because the body remembers the orders the world has taught. She takes one step, then another, toward the exit of the yard, toward the path that will lead to his house, with its compound walls and loud laughter and rules that echo. Her cheek throbs. She lowers her gaze, not in surrender, but in an instinct to guard the animal of herself. Someone laughs softly. Someone sighs. Someone says, "It will be settled at home." The word home lifts and falls, hollow as a gourd. They reach the shadow of the acacia. The cool there is thin but real. The smell changes. Under the dust she can smell sap and old wind. A bead of her mother's sweat breaks free and slides. She hears it in her mind, absurdly. She hears everything now, the soft, wet smack of fruit falling somewhere beyond the fence, the hiss of a woman's breath as she tries not to be seen watching, the distant chop of wood from the path to the forest, regular, patient, as if a heart were splitting itself carefully to make room. She glances back. Nuru's face is the color of river stone. Saphira purses her mouth around a prayer that won't be born. The diviner stares at his own hands as if they were strangers. The whispers start again, but they have changed. Less outrage now, more calculation. The council will not like this. There will be talk of fines anyway. She made the day dirty. Why didn't the mother speak? Because the price was good. Because these are bad times. Because the word because is a well that never ends. Amina hears them and feels as if a web were thrown over her shoulders. A net not to catch fish, but to teach fish that water is a kind of prison. She closes her eyes for one breath, then opens them. The light stings. The path to Biko's house runs like a scar across the yellow grass. Her father does not move. Her mother's scarf trembles. A child breaks free from a woman's grip and runs toward the pen of goats, laughing. The laughter is a pure bell inside a mud wall. It startles Amina with its beauty, and for a blink, the yard is as she once believed yards could be, a place where sound is light and no one owns anyone. Then the child is caught and scolded and the bell goes out. Biko tugs her, impatient. She stumbles and finds her balance. Her cheek burns like a brand. The place where his fingers hold her hums with a dull ache. She looks past the acacia toward the border of the forest. There, where the sun breaks into bars and the shade is layered like a secret, something shifts. A figure stands just within the fringe of trees, half sliced by shadow, not moving, watching. The light strikes steel low in the grass, maybe a blade, maybe only a trick of sun on stone. She cannot be sure. The breeze carries a breath of wood smoke from that direction, older than the feast smoke, deeper, the kind of smoke that clings to a life lived alone. Her heart stutters once, not in fear but in recognition without memory, as if a story she doesn't know has already begun to write her name. Walk, Biko says, and the word rubs her raw. She walks. The wedding yard recedes. The sound of it follows, thick with talk and clatter, with the relief of those spared the trouble of choosing. Someone picks up the drum and tests a new rhythm, unsure whether there is anything left to beat. The diviner lowers his staff and stares straight into the sun as if to punish himself for being old. At the gate, a woman steps aside to let them pass. She looks at Amina's cheek. She looks at the grip on Amina's arm. Her eyes flicker, and then she smooths her face into nothing. Silence does not always mean agreement. Silence does not always mean dissent. Sometimes silence is a table where the village lays its hunger and eats. Amina tastes the copper of her own resolve under the dust and salt. She had expected an answer from her father, a hand from her mother. She has received time instead, time collapsing, time stretching thin as skin. All she has is the word she said and the shape it makes in her chest. No becomes a room she can sit inside. No becomes a small fire cupped in both palms. They reach the edge of the yard. The path ahead is bright and merciless. The figure at the forest fringe has not moved. The wind lifts. Leaves turn their pale undersides like 1,000 coins, remembering light. The distant chopping stops. In the pause, a bird whistles a question and waits. Biko pulls. The skin on Amina's wrist pinches. She looks down so the world cannot see her flinch, so the world cannot name it anything but dust in her eye. Her feet find the rut that runs along the path like a vein. The ground is warm through thin soles. A grass seed pricks her ankle. Small pain meets large pain, and the body makes a pact to endure both. Behind her, the murmurs swell and fall like a tide. In front of her, the forest edge breathes. The shape in the shadows, still there, still watching, tilts its head a fraction, an almost bow or an assessment. A spark travels along her spine, the smallest rumor of future. She does not look back again. She does not give the village the gift of her tears. She rolls the word she owns across her tongue once more, soundless. She steps forward through heat and dust and the smell of smoke and palm wine, into a day that has turned its face away from her, and somewhere in the shade metal kisses wood, patient and sure, as if a different kind of answer is sharpening itself for when the sun begins to fall. The dust rose in a choking cloud, as Biko dragged Amina across the packed earth, his fingers digging into her arm like claws. Her cheek still burned from the strike he had delivered before the entire village, a brand she could not wipe away. The murmur of voices behind them had already begun to fade, leaving only the sound of sandals scraping gravel and the frantic beat of her heart. She stumbled, the hem of her dress catching on a thorn, but his pull was merciless. The world tilted between sunlight and shadow, the path toward his compound narrowing like a trap. No one followed, no one called her name. It was as though the crowd had exhaled and decided the story was finished. Shame sealed their lips, or perhaps hunger, or perhaps the memory of cattle too costly to risk. The silence of the village was louder than the strike itself. Amina's throat tightened. Dust clung to her tongue, bitter, metallic. Her vision blurred as her tears refused to fall. Her breath came sharp, like stones lodged in her chest. She wanted to scream, but could not. The rope around her was not made of hemp. It was made of silence, and eyes turned away. The path twisted by the acacia grove. The smell of wood smoke drifted faintly, and with it came the sound of something else. Low, steady, deliberate, a rhythm of chopping carried on the wind. Each blow of iron into wood landed like a second heartbeat, patient and unhurried. It cut through the haze of her panic. She raised her head. At the edge of the grove, shadow shifted. "Walk faster," Biko hissed, yanking her forward. His voice was the voice of a man confident in ownership, a man who believed the world agreed with him. They rounded the bend, and then the sound stopped. The air changed. The silence was too full, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. A figure stepped out from between the trees. He was taller than Biko, shoulders broad, arms lined with the memory of labor. His skin was darkened by years beneath the sun, his hair tied back with a strip of cloth. In his hand he carried an axe, but its head was pointed downward, the blade catching the fading light like water. He did not lift it. Instead, he drove the shaft gently into the soil, leaving it planted like a witness. His other hand rested easily at his side. His presence was calm, yet the calmness carried a gravity that pressed against the chest like stone. Amina froze. Her breath snagged. She had seen him before, at the fringes of gatherings, a man who never lingered, who lived beyond the chatter of the market. Jahlani. The name whispered in the village like a rumor carved into bark. Biko's grip tightened. "Move," he muttered. But his voice had lost its ease. Jahlani's eyes, steady and unreadable, fixed on Biko first, then on Amina. He spoke only once. "She will go with me." The air cracked as if lightning had split the silence. Biko barked a laugh, sharp and too loud. "She is mine, a bride bound by cattle and cloth. Step aside, Woodcutter." But the sound of his laughter did not find echoes in the trees. The villagers who had followed at a distance now hovered at the curve of the path, their whispers weaving into the air. Some spoke of debt and shame, but others said the older story, the one about fire in the hills and the children trapped in smoke. They told of the night Jahlani carried them out, one by one, when no other dared step into the blaze. They told of the river crossing where he alone pulled the raft against the current, when a flood threatened to sweep the village children away. A man scarred by solitude, yes, but solitude born of loss, not cowardice. The whispers reached Biko's ears. His jaw twitched. He looked at the axe planted in the soil, at the broad hand resting loosely by Jahlani's side. He knew the village law had shifted in recent seasons. The elders had decreed that no woman could be forced into a union against her will. Still, tradition clung like old vines, and many ignored the new words. But here, in the open path, with eyes upon them and whispers taking shape into judgment, Biko hesitated. Amina's arm throbbed where he held her. Her body leaned back, instinct straining away from him toward the steady figure before her. She felt the heat of shame mix with the fragile ember of hope. Biko's smile cracked. "This is not your matter, hermit. She belongs with me. The council will see it. Her father accepted the gifts." Jahlani did not move. His voice was low, but it carried farther than shouting. "A gift does not buy a soul." The words landed heavier than a blow. Some of the villagers gasped. One old man shook his head, muttering about the anger of ancestors. But another, younger, said, "He speaks truth. The law was spoken." Biko's eyes darted among the faces. He saw not loyalty, not the assurance of the crowd, but uncertainty. He saw judgment forming like a storm. His hand faltered. He released Amina's arm, but only to shove her forward as if discarding a bundle of firewood. "She is not worth the trouble," he spat, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. His sandal scraped as he turned sharply, disappearing back down the path. His companions, who had lingered further behind, followed in silence, their steps heavy with unease. The villagers did not cheer. They did not step forward. They simply watched as Biko vanished, leaving a trail of dust. Their eyes flicked to Amina, then to Jahlani, then away again, afraid to anchor themselves to either side too openly. Silence folded over the path once more. Amina stood trembling, her cheek hot with pain, her chest heaving with breath she could not steady. She lifted her gaze toward the man before her. His expression was not victory, not triumph, but something older, an acceptance of burden. His eyes held no demand, no hunger, only stillness, as if he had stood in storms larger than this one and learned patience. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Why did you—" The question broke in half. She swallowed. "Why?" Jahlani pulled the axe from the soil. The sound of wood sliding free was sharp, final. He rested it on his shoulder. "Because no one else did." The words hung between them like smoke. Behind them, the villagers began to drift away, some muttering about fines, some whispering about fate. But Amina's ears filled with only one sound, the steady heartbeat she had heard in the rhythm of his axe, the heartbeat that now seemed to steady her own. She looked down at her wrist, the skin red where Biko's hand had held her. She curled her fingers against it, a silent vow that it would not be branded there forever. When she raised her eyes again, Jahlani had already begun to walk back toward the line of trees, the shadow swallowing his figure. He did not beckon. He did not command. But his steps were slow, as if leaving space for another set of footsteps beside his. The choice pressed against her chest like a stone, heavy and frightening. The village had turned its back. Her parents had turned their faces away. Biko had claimed her as property and discarded her as shame. Before her stretched only the darkness of the forest and the back of a man who owed her nothing. Amina's throat tightened. The taste of dust still coated her tongue, but beneath it was something else, something like the cool trace of water she had not yet drunk. She took a step. The sound was small, yet it cracked the silence. She took another, the hem of her dress brushing dry grass. Her heartbeat matched the memory of the axe. By the time she reached the trees, the light of the village yard was far behind, and the air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. She did not know where he would lead her. She did not know if she was walking into salvation or another cage, but for the first time since the word no had left her lips, she felt the thread of fear loosen just enough to let breath move freely. Behind her, the village carried on as if nothing had happened. Ahead, the forest swallowed her steps, and beside the path, the axe glinted once more before sinking into shadow, like a promise yet to be named. The first thing she heard was the hiss of rainwater dripping through the roof. Amina's eyes snapped open to darkness, her breath sharp against the musty air. For a moment she thought she was still under the canopy in the village yard, still bound by shame and silence. But then the smell came, wood smoke, curling into the corners, sharp and clean, layered with the faint sweetness of millet cooking. She shifted. The rough mat beneath her back scratched her skin. A single flame crackled in the hearth, throwing its glow against the uneven planks of a hut she did not know. Her pulse raced. She pushed herself up, her hand brushing the edge of a clay bowl left near her side. Inside it, rice still steamed, the grains swollen and fragrant. Someone had set it there while she slept. Someone had thought to feed her. Her throat tightened at the sight. Hunger gnawed, but suspicion was louder. What price would come with such a gift? Her cheek still throbbed where Biko's hand had fallen. She touched it and winced, feeling the heat of swelling beneath her skin. The silence of the hut pressed close. Outside, the forest breathed, crickets ticking, the low hum of frogs in wet grass, branches creaking against each other in the wind. She pulled the cloth of her dress tighter around her shoulders, her breath fogging faintly in the cool night air. Amina's eyes scanned the room. The walls were patched with bark and clay. A bundle of dried herbs hung from the rafters. A stool leaned near the hearth, worn smooth by years of use, and in the far corner, an axe leaned upright against the wall, its blade glinting red in the firelight. She flinched. The door shifted with the sound of a hinge. A figure entered, broad shoulders, hair damp with rain, hands carrying kindling. Jahlani. He placed the wood by the hearth, crouched, and fed the flame. He didn't look at her right away, as if the act of tending the fire was more important than questions or demands. Sparks jumped. His hands were steady, his movements quiet, measured. Amina's breath snagged. Her chest ached with the weight of silence. She braced herself for words she did not want to hear, what she must give in return, what kind of debt she had already walked into. But when he finally turned, his gaze brushed over her without claim, only recognition that she was awake. "Eat," he said, voice low, as if speaking too loud might break the night. The bowl was warm against her palms. She raised it slowly, the smell of rice filling her nose. Her stomach clenched with hunger, yet her throat refused to swallow. Suspicion lingered. She waited for his eyes to demand. They did not. He had already turned back to patch a leak in the roof with strips of bark, his back to her, his shoulders glistening faintly in the firelight. She tasted one bite. The grains were plain, no salt, but they filled her mouth with a comfort she had forgotten. A sob rose in her throat, surprising her, but she forced it down, chewing hard. She ate in silence, every bite carrying both relief and fear. Hours passed like that, him working quietly, her stealing glances wondering what hidden trap lay in such calm. When the fire sank low, he spoke again. "Rest. You are safe here." Then he lay a blanket near the hearth, stretched his body across the dirt floor, and closed his eyes. The simplicity of it unsettled her more than cruelty would have. She lay awake long after, staring at the roof beams, listening to his breathing steady as a drum beat, her thoughts tangling. Morning cracked with bird song. Light slid through the gaps in the wall, gold against smoke-stained wood. Amina sat up, her body aching but her mind sharper. Jahlani was gone. On the stool, a fresh pot steamed, water rolling with the scent of boiled herbs. Beside it, bread lay wrapped in a cloth. She rose, legs unsteady, and explored. The hut was small, yet each corner told a story. Tools arranged neatly, gourds cleaned and stacked, clothes folded in quiet order. No chaos, no sign of a woman's touch, only one man's hand arranging his world to withstand loneliness. When she reached the center of the floor, her foot caught against a plank. It lifted slightly under her weight. Her breath caught. She knelt, pressed her fingers to the edge, and felt it shift. Something was hidden beneath. She hesitated, glancing toward the door. The forest outside whispered, urging her forward. Her pulse thudded. She pried the plank loose. Beneath lay a shallow space lined with cloth. Her hand trembled as she pulled it free. What she uncovered stopped her breath. A tiny shirt, hand-stitched, the seams frayed from never being worn. Beside it, a folded note, ink smudged by water, but words still legible. She read. The lines spoke of love to a woman unnamed, of a child unborn, of a storm that took them both before he could hold them. Amina pressed the little shirt to her chest, her tears hot, spilling over. She had expected a demand for her body, for her labor, for her silence. Instead, she found grief, raw and buried. The hut was not a prison. It was a tomb for memory. She lowered the cloth gently back into its resting place, her heart heavy with a sorrow not her own. For the first time since the village yard, she did not feel utterly alone. Pain answered pain, hers reflected in his. That night she sat near the fire again, the shirt's ghost still against her chest. The flames danced, shadows leaping across the walls. Jahlani returned from the forest, his arms heavy with wood. He saw her gaze, saw the shimmer in her eyes, but said nothing. He simply set the wood down and tended the fire. Her voice trembled when she whispered, "Why do you help me?" He didn't lift his head. His eyes stayed on the flames. Because someone should. The fire popped. Sparks drifted upward like brief stars. Amina wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. For the first time, she admitted to herself that she felt something she had not known in years. Not love, not trust, but the first fragile taste of safety. Her tears fell quietly into the fire's glow. She whispered to the night, to herself, to the hollow in her chest. For the first time, I feel safe. And in the silence that followed, her words seemed to linger in the smoke, as though the forest itself had leaned closer to listen, carrying them into the dark, where they would wait for what came next. The rain hammered the roof in erratic bursts, each drop a drumbeat above Amina's head. She jolted awake, her breath sharp in the damp air. The mat beneath her back was scratchy, her body stiff, as if she had been folded wrong in her sleep. For one terrifying moment, she thought she was still on the path being dragged by Biko, still hearing his breath against her ear. But no, the scent here was different. Smoke, damp wood, and something boiling faintly in a clay pot. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness. The hut was small, its walls rough planks patched with clay, the light of a small fire licking across them. She sat up, heart racing, her cheek still throbbing where Biko's hand had left its mark. She touched it and winced, heat blooming beneath her skin. A low crackle of fire soothed the silence. Outside, crickets pulsed, and water dripped steadily from the eaves into the earth below. Beside her lay a bowl. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of rice. She flinched as if it were a trick, some bait left for her to stumble into. Her stomach growled anyway. She picked it up with both hands, the warmth seeping into her palms. She hesitated, waiting for footsteps, for a demand, for the inevitable voice claiming payment. But the only sound was the door opening. He came in with a bundle of firewood, shoulders soaked from the rain, hair plastered to his forehead. Jahlani. He set the wood down, crouched by the fire, and fed it carefully. His movements were quiet, unhurried, as though the night itself belonged to him. He did not look at her immediately, and when he did, his eyes carried no claim. "Eat," he said simply. His voice was low, steady, almost lost in the patter of rain. She searched his face for the trap, the condition, the invisible chain. She found none. Only the firelight flickering against lines carved by solitude. He turned back to the hearth, lifted the pot, and poured steaming water into a gourd. He drank once, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and set it aside. Then he spread a blanket across the floor, laid himself down near the embers, and closed his eyes. Amina's fingers trembled as she lifted the first bite to her lips. The rice was plain, unseasoned, but it filled her mouth with warmth. She chewed slowly, fighting the lump in her throat. A tear slipped out before she could stop it, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand. She finished the bowl in silence, every bite both relief and guilt. She wanted to believe this was kindness. She could not. Sleep came fitful. Dreams of voices in the village yard chased her into the dark. Her father's silence, her mother's lowered gaze, the crack of Biko's hand across her face. She woke more than once, heart pounding, staring at the shadow of the axe leaning against the wall. By morning the storm had passed. Light poured through the gaps in the planks, golden and damp. The smell of wet earth drifted inside. Jahlani was gone. In his place on the stool, he had left another clay bowl filled with porridge. Her stomach tightened again, and again she hesitated before eating. Her eyes wandered. The hut was bare but orderly. Clothes folded, tools cleaned, herbs tied in neat bundles hanging from the rafters. Every detail spoke of a man who carried his life alone, with no one to share its weight. She moved to tidy the corner where she had slept, and her foot struck a loose plank. It shifted beneath her. Her pulse quickened. She crouched, pressing her fingers along the edge until the wood lifted. A hollow space lay beneath. She should have closed it. She should have walked away. But the emptiness of the hut, the silence of the forest pressing in, pushed her forward. Inside lay a small cloth bundle. She pulled it out with careful hands. The fabric was soft with age, the threads frayed. She unfolded it and froze. A tiny shirt, hand-stitched, no larger than for a child not yet walking. Alongside it, a folded scrap of paper. She unfolded the paper. The ink had run in places. The words blurred, but enough remained. They spoke of love for a woman never named, of waiting for a child not yet born, of the storm that had taken them both before they could be held. Amina pressed the shirt to her chest. Tears broke free, hot and unstoppable. This hut was no lair of a predator. It was a tomb, a shrine for grief. She had feared being trapped in a man's hunger, only to stumble into a man's wound. She quickly folded the shirt, slid it back into its place, and pressed the plank down again. But the image would not leave her. The thought clung to her ribs. The man who had stood before Biko not as a rival, not as a savior seeking prize, but as someone who had already lost everything once. When Jahlani returned that evening carrying fish strung on a reed, she avoided his eyes. He set the fish down, stoked the fire, and prepared them with practiced hands. The scent of roasting flesh filled the hut, rich and smoky. She wanted to thank him, but her throat closed around the words. Finally, she whispered, "Why do you help me?" He didn't look at her. He poked the fire with a stick, sparks drifting upward. Because no one else did. The simplicity of it broke her. She clutched the blanket tighter, her tears spilling silently, the firelight blurring. He did not turn to see. That night, she sat awake long after, listening to the forest breathe. The fire cracked softly, the hut alive with shadows. She thought of the child-sized shirt beneath the floor, the words on the paper, the ache in her own chest. Her pain had always been hers alone. Now it mirrored something larger, something that lived in this hut with her. Her lips moved against the blanket, the words small, meant only for herself, yet they filled the space as if the walls leaned closer to listen. For the first time, I feel safe. The fire hissed. The forest stirred. Her words hung there like smoke, fragile but real, daring the night to take them away. The storm came like a punishment. The sky cracked open with a roar, and water poured through every seam of the roof. Amina jolted awake, her body shivering in the damp, the mat beneath her already soaked. The fire had gone out hours ago, leaving the hut swallowed in shadow. Lightning flared, white and violent, throwing the room into a strobe of fragments, wooden beams slick with water, the axe glinting in its corner, and her own reflection caught in a puddle spreading across the dirt floor. She scrambled to gather the few things near her, blanket, bowl, the clay pot, but the rain had no mercy. A surge of wind forced the door wide, and the hut shuddered as though the forest itself meant to rip it apart. Her heart raced, her breath short. She pressed her back to the wall, hands over her ears, and prayed the roof would not give way. The sound came first as a creak, then a split. A plank groaned under pressure, lifting slightly where she had once noticed it loose. She stared. The floorboards buckled with each gust. Then the storm pressed harder, and the wood gave way. The plank snapped free, exposing the hollow she had touched before, but never fully uncovered. Water rushed in, carrying mud and leaves into the cavity. Something inside shifted, scraping faintly against the boards. Her pulse leapt. She crawled forward, rain soaking her hair and dress, and reached down. Her fingers met fabric, heavy with damp. She pulled. A small wooden box sealed with iron hinges slid into the open. Its weight surprised her, as though it carried not just wood but years. The storm howled louder, but her world narrowed to that box, to the sense that the hut itself had forced its secret into her hands. She lifted it, trembling. Her breath fogged the lid. With a snap of her thumb, she loosened the catch. The lid creaked open. Inside lay a bundle of baby clothes, impossibly small, cotton-yellowed with time, a shirt no bigger than her two hands, folded neatly, edges still smelling faintly of smoke and lavender. Beneath it, a letter, its paper warped, but words clinging stubbornly to the page. Her eyes moved across the ink. The words were jagged, hurried, but soaked with devotion. They spoke of a woman Jahlani had once loved, how they had built this hut together, dreamed of filling it with children's laughter, how she had been heavy with child when the storm came years ago, flooding the valley, tearing their boat against the rocks. how the water had stolen both mother and child before he could hold either. Amina pressed the shirt to her chest. The fabric was cold, damp, but it burned against her like fire. She closed her eyes, tears spilling fast. The image of the man who had stood so silently before Biko now unfolded into clarity. He was not a hermit by choice. He was a man who had buried his heart beneath wood and silence, who had built walls not to keep people out, but to keep grief in. The storm raged on, but she no longer heard it. Her sobs drowned the thunder. She rocked slightly, the shirt crushed to her, as though she could somehow warm it, give it the life it never had. The door slammed against the wind. Jahlani burst in, his frame soaked, carrying a bundle of firewood, as if the storm were no more than inconvenience. He froze when he saw her, the box open, the clothes in her arms. For a long moment the rain spoke for both of them. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. Her lips trembled, but no apology formed. She could not unsee, could not unhold. Jahlani set the wood down slowly. His hand hovered near the axe, but not for violence, just instinct, as though the act of holding it steadied him. His shoulders slumped. He stepped forward, the fire in his eyes dimmer, older. "You shouldn't," he began, but his voice broke. He pressed his lips together, staring at the tiny shirt in her hands. Her tears flowed harder. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, though she knew it was a lie. Curiosity had led her. The storm had forced her. But the truth was she had wanted to understand. He sat heavily on the stool, his wet clothes dripping into the mud. His face folded inward, each line a scar carved by years of silence. For the first time she saw him not as rescuer, not as stranger, but as a man hollowed out by loss. "They were gone before I reached them," he said finally, voice low, nearly swallowed by the storm. "The river was faster than my arms. I tried. Gods know I tried. I pulled her shawl from the water, but her face—" His breath cracked. He did not finish. Amina clutched the shirt tighter, tears sliding down her cheeks. She felt her own pain mirror his, her rejection, her abandonment, her loneliness now twined with his grief. Different wounds, but cut from the same blade of fate. She set the shirt gently back in the box, her hands shaking. Then she looked at him. Their eyes met, hers swollen, his shadowed, and in that gaze lay recognition. Two lives broken in different ways, bound now not by obligation, not by possession, but by sorrow. The storm eased. The rain softened to a whisper, dripping steadily from the eaves. The fire crackled again where he had stoked it. The hut smelled of wet earth and smoke. Amina wrapped herself in the blanket and sat near the fire. The image of the child-sized shirt burned into her heart. She had entered this hut fearing she would be claimed as property. Instead, she had uncovered a grave of memory. Her whisper carried through the quiet, fragile as smoke. "We are both alone." Jahlani lifted his head, his eyes softened just slightly, and for the first time he did not look away. The box remained between them on the floor, open, its contents bare. The storm had forced truth into light, and neither could place it back in the dark. Amina stared into the fire, her tears drying on her cheeks. The crackling flames seemed to echo her own chest, painful, restless, but alive. Her voice trembled, breaking the silence once more. Maybe alone doesn't have to stay that way. The fire hissed, sparks leaping. He did not answer, but the weight in the room shifted, less like chains, more like something waiting to heal. Outside the storm cleared, leaving the forest dripping silver in the moonlight. Inside, the air thickened with a new question neither dared to ask, yet both could feel. What would grow from the ashes of two lives burned hollow? Amina curled near the fire, the sound of dripping water like a heartbeat against the earth. Her eyes closed, the echo of that tiny shirt pressed forever against her soul. And in the silence that followed, the hut seemed to breathe with them, as if it too had been waiting for this night. The pounding on the door came like a hammer to the heart. Amina startled, the bowl in her lap tipping, rice scattering across the floor. She froze. The sound came again, louder, fists thudding against the wooden planks as if they meant to break them down. The small hut seemed to shrink with every blow. Her breath stuck in her throat. She turned toward the doorway, her pulse wild. Outside, voices snarled through the wood. Biko's voice rose above the storm of knocks, sharp and bitter. "Open this door. She is mine. She is my wife, my property." Amina's body locked, her stomach clenched. She scrambled backward until her spine hit the wall. Shadows from the fire flickered over her face, trembling with each breath she stole. She remembered the sting of his hand, the taste of dust on her lips. Now that same voice, once hidden in laughter and promises, cut through the night like iron on stone. The banging grew harder, the planks groaned, then silence, broken by the scrape of feet shifting outside. She heard two other men muttering, their tones harsh, agreeing with him. Her skin went cold. He had not come alone. Amina's gaze shot to the axe propped against the wall. She swallowed hard. Her trembling fingers curled into her skirt. She wanted to scream for Jahlani, but the forest was wide, and her voice felt too small to matter. The door rattled once more. "Amina," Biko hissed, lower now, the kind of whisper that chilled more than shouting. "You think you can shame me? You think you can run into the woods and hide behind a coward? Open, or I will break this place down." The fire spat. Sparks leapt. The wood of the door quivered under his next blow, then footsteps. Not from outside, but inside the forest. Steady, slow, deliberate. They grew closer, crunching through the wet soil, each step heavy as if it carried all the patience of stone. The door thudded one last time. Then silence again. Amina's eyes darted to the entrance. She held her breath. The wooden bar across the door held still. A shadow stretched across the floor as the latch clicked. The door opened, not outward but inward, slow, creaking. And there he was. Jahlani filled the doorway, his shoulders broad, his hand resting on the axe slung across his back. He did not rush. He stepped in as if the night had been waiting for him. Biko's voice rose immediately, sharp with triumph. There you are. Hand her over. She is mine. You think you can keep what I paid for?" Jahlani did not answer. He set the firewood he carried down by the hearth. His movements were unhurried, his face calm. He did not even look at Biko yet. Only after placing the last piece of wood did he turn, straightening, his eyes landing on the door frame. The men outside shifted. Amina heard the scrape of sandals, the shuffle of unease. One of them muttered about the council's new law, about the ban on forced unions, about fines heavier than pride could carry. The other hissed for silence. Biko stepped closer to the threshold. His fury masked his fear, but not well. He spat into the dirt. "Say something, hermit. You hide in the woods, but you don't know how things are done. She belongs to me. Move aside." Jahlani stood tall. His hand rested on the axe handle stuck upright in the chopping block by the fire, but he did not lift it. His silence filled the hut heavier than thunder. Finally, his voice broke it, low and steady. "This house is no man's cage, not yours, not mine." The words drifted outward. A few villagers had gathered on the path, drawn by the shouting. Amina saw their outlines beyond the firelight, faces pale, whispers riding the wind. Some nodded at Biko's claim, but others lowered their eyes, ashamed. The law had changed. They all knew it. A new decree had been spoken at the last council gathering. No woman should be dragged into marriage by force. Old ways still clung, but fear of punishment clung harder. Biko's jaw twitched. He looked around, desperate for approval. But the crowd was no longer his shield. The whispers shifted, no longer mocking Amina but questioning him. "And you dare defy me," he spat again. But his voice cracked under its own weight. Jahlani stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the doorway. His gaze locked on Biko, steady and sharp, the kind of look that stripped a man to his bones. He did not raise his weapon. He did not need to. The axe at his side was enough, but it was his presence that broke the air. Biko faltered. His chest heaved, his nostrils flared. He wanted to strike, to claw back his pride, but his body betrayed him. The law hung over him. The whispers burned his skin, and Jahlani's eyes told him that if he made one wrong move, the forest itself would remember it forever. Slowly, his grip on the doorframe loosened. He spat again, weaker this time, and stepped back. His companions hesitated, then followed. The path echoed with their retreating footsteps, fading into silence. Amina sagged against the wall. Her chest heaved, tears burning her eyes. Her body shook with the release of terror she had not allowed herself to show. Her fingers dug into the blanket, holding on as though it were the only anchor left. The villagers who had lingered outside did not laugh. They did not speak. They looked once at Jahlani, once at Amina, and then slipped back into the night. Their silence was not the silence of complicity this time. It was a silence of reckoning, heavy with the knowledge that something had shifted. Inside the hut, the fire flickered. Amina looked up. Jahlani was still standing by the door, his hand resting on the axe handle, though he had never lifted it. His breath was calm, but his shoulders carried the weight of storms. Her voice cracked. "He would have taken me." Jahlani looked at her, his eyes softening. For a heartbeat, sorrow and strength intertwined in his gaze. Then he said quietly, "Not while I stand." Her tears broke free. She pressed her hand to her mouth, sobbing into her palm. The sound filled the small hut, raw and unhidden. She felt herself collapse into the truth. For the first time, she was not just resisting, not just surviving. Someone had placed themselves between her and the cruelty of the world without asking for anything in return. The fire hissed. Sparks leapt. Outside, the forest sighed with the wind. Amina slid down the wall, her body trembling, her breath broken. She curled her arms around her knees. She had been abandoned by her father, silenced by her mother, betrayed by her village. And yet, here, she found herself shielded not by bonds of blood or law, but by the steady will of a man who asked nothing but to stand between her and harm. She whispered through her tears, barely audible, "Why me?" Jahlani did not answer. He turned back toward the fire, placed another log on the flames, and let the silence speak for him. The embers glowed brighter, catching her tear-streaked face in their light. The room seemed to breathe again, but the weight in her chest only deepened, for safety was not freedom, and protection was not belonging. She leaned her head against the wall, her eyes closing, her body still shaking. Relief and fear mixed until she could not tell them apart, and in that fragile balance, one truth carved itself deep into her heart. For the first time, she was not property. The night ended with her tears falling into the silence, the fire crackling, and a question rising in her chest like smoke. If not property, then what could she become? The first scream came slicing through the storm. Amina dropped the bundle of firewood she carried, the logs scattering across wet ground. Her ears strained. Again, the sound of children shrieking carried on the rush of wind from the riverbank. She turned and saw it, a line of muddy water rising, faster than it should, thick with branches, debris, and fear. The flood was climbing. "Jahlani," she cried, her voice breaking against the roar of rain. He was already moving, his axe abandoned on the porch, his body lunging down the slope. Amina stumbled after him, her feet slipping in the mud, the rain blinding. Every breath she took tasted of earth and iron. By the bank, the scene was chaos. 5 children clung to a crooked tree that leaned over the water, their thin limbs shaking, their faces pale with terror. The river clawed at the roots beneath them, each surge threatening to tear the tree from its hold. Women on the far side screamed, their cries swallowed by thunder. Men stood frozen at a distance, calculating, afraid. Amina's chest constricted. She did not think. She moved. She reached the edge, the water licking her calves, icy and wild. Jahlani grabbed a long branch and pushed it forward, shouting for the children to reach. Their hands flailed, but the distance was too great. One boy slipped, his small body crashing into the current. Amina dove before she could stop herself. The water hit like stone, dragging her under. She fought upward, choking, her arms reaching for the child. His eyes were wide, mouth open in silent scream as the current swept him away. She lunged, caught his wrist, and the force nearly tore her shoulder out. She screamed against the water, clawing for footing. Then another hand grabbed her. Jahlani. His grip was iron, his other arm hauling the boy against his chest. Together they stumbled back to shore, collapsing in the mud. The boy coughed, spat water, and sobbed into Amina's lap. Relief flooded her, but no time. The others still clung to the tree, and the roots cracked louder with each surge. She rose, her legs quaking, her heart slamming against her ribs. Jahlani's jaw tightened. He stripped his belt, tied it to the branch, and stepped waist-deep into the torrent. The current slammed him, but he held firm, his hand outstretched. "Take them one by one," he shouted. Amina steadied herself on the bank, her palms raw against the bark of a fallen log. She shouted encouragement, her voice tearing. One girl reached, caught Jahlani's arm, and he pulled her free. Amina grabbed the child and dragged her onto safe ground. Again and again. Their bodies bruised, their hands bleeding, they pulled the children from the clutches of water until the last boy leapt from the breaking tree and collapsed into Jahlani's arms. The river swallowed the tree with a roar. Silence followed for a beat, only the rain pounding. The children clung to Amina, sobbing, coughing. She wrapped them in her arms, her tears mixing with rain. She looked up and saw the villagers on the hill, staring down wide-eyed. They had watched everything. Whispers carried through the storm. She saved them. He pulled them all, together. Their voices shifted, no longer sharp with scorn, but heavy with awe. Later, when the river calmed and the children were returned to trembling mothers, the village gathered beneath the council tree. The air was thick with smoke and damp earth. Amina stood by Jahlani's side, her dress torn, her face streaked with mud, her body trembling with exhaustion. Yet she stood tall. For the first time, she did not shrink from their eyes. The elders debated. Some still muttered about shame, about her defiance at the wedding. Others spoke of courage, of law, of the children saved before their eyes. Then the crowd parted as an old figure approached, her cane tapping against the earth. Malaika, the blind woman, the one whose words the village still feared and revered. Her milky eyes stared into nothing, but her voice cut through everything. "A man who raises his hand to possess is weak," she said, each word a drumbeat. "A man who shields without asking is strong, and a woman who dares to stand beside him is stronger still." The hush was complete. No one argued. Her words struck like lightning, burning away excuses. The villagers shifted, their faces breaking open with something new, respect, uneasy, and unsure, but real. Amina's breath shook. She felt Jahlani's hand brush hers, tentative but steady. Slowly she intertwined her fingers with his. Gasps rippled. Not shame, not laughter. A silence of witness, of something no one could deny. She raised her chin, meeting their eyes. For the first time she felt them seeing her not as burden, not as disgrace, but as someone who had stood against water and darkness and not been swept away. The night closed around them, but the weight of the moment lingered. The fire cracked. The air smelled of wet ash and promise. Amina's hand tightened around Jahlani's. Her heart pounded with fear, with defiance, with a fragile, burning hope. Yet beneath it, another question stirred, deep and dangerous. If the village began to respect her, what would Biko do when respect turned against him? The thought shivered through her as the crowd dispersed, leaving her hand still in Jahlani's, the embers glowing, the night heavy with things yet to come. The letter arrived folded twice, edges pressed sharp, as if the sender feared its words might escape. Amina found it resting on the wooden stool by the doorway, placed there at dawn when the forest was still heavy with mist. She had woken to birdsong, to the smell of damp earth after rain, to the quiet comfort of firewood already stacked by Jahlani, and then she saw the paper, her name written on the front in her father's hand. Her stomach tightened as she unfolded it. The ink was uneven, some strokes dark, others faint, as if his hand had shaken. She read quickly, her eyes rushing past the greetings and blessings. Each line burned deeper until her breath caught. "Or return. All can be mended. If you come home, the bride price will not fall on us. I will speak to the council. They will pardon the woodcutter's use of land. All will be restored if you step back into your place." Her hands trembled. She read it twice, then a third time, as if meaning might change under repetition. But the words were fixed. Her father was not begging her forgiveness, not admitting guilt for turning his face away at her wedding. He was bargaining. Her return was the coin to buy safety, to wipe debts, to ease shame. Her throat burned. The fire in the hearth flicked low, and she thought of the child-sized shirt she had once cradled in this hut, soaked with another's grief. She thought of her own cheek branded by Biko's hand, of her mother's bowed head. She thought of the river swallowing branches while she and Jahlani had pulled children back to life. And now, after all of that, her worth was still a measure weighed against cattle and land. Jahlani returned from the forest carrying a bundle of herbs. He saw the letter in her lap, her eyes red, her breath uneven. He paused in the doorway, his silence heavier than speech. Finally he asked, "What does it say?" She lifted her gaze, voice raw. He wants me back. He promises if I return, you will not lose your land. He promises debts will be forgiven. The words lodged between them like a knife. Jahlani said nothing. He set the herbs down, his movements too careful, too slow. His shoulders were taut, his jaw clenched. For a moment she saw pain flicker across his face, a pain that had nothing to do with the letter but with the memory of losing everything once before. The room thickened with silence. The fire sputtered. Rainwater from last night's storm dripped from the eaves, each drop a drum. Amina rose. Her body felt stiff, every step heavy as if chains had been laid on her shoulders again. She went to the hearth, picked up the letter, and held it over the flame. The paper curled, edges blackening, smoke rising sharp and bitter. The words vanished line by line until only ashes fell to the floor. The fire flared once, swallowing it whole. Jahlani turned quickly, eyes wide. Why? She faced him, her chest trembling but her voice clear. Because I am not going back, not to bargains, not to debts, not to a past that asks me to kneel so others may stand taller. If I stay here, it is because I choose it, not because I was cast out, not because I owe you safety, not because my father trades my life for land. I stay because I choose. The words shook her even as she spoke them, but as they left her lips, she felt the air shift, felt something ancient break open inside her chest. For once she was not only refusing, she was declaring. Jahlani's gaze did not move from her face. His breath was uneven. His eyes glistened in the firelight, not with weakness, but with something rawer. Pride, sorrow, fear, all knotted together. You burn bridges you cannot rebuild, he said softly, almost to himself. Then let them burn, she answered. The fire crackled. Smoke stung her eyes. She felt the weight of her choice settle deep into her bones. No turning back. Night fell heavy. The forest sang with insects, with owls calling from branches. Amina sat by the fire, watching shadows crawl across the walls. Her chest was still unsteady, but her heart beat with something new, something fierce. She was no longer the girl dragged by her arm, no longer the bride abandoned by silence. She had spoken a choice into being, and it was hers alone. Yet even as she sat in the glow, she felt Jahlani's eyes linger on her, filled with quiet storms. He did not question her again, but his silence carried both pain and respect. It told her that he knew what it cost to choose, and that he would not take that choice from her. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her mind replaying the image of the burning letter. Its ashes still lay scattered at her feet, dark against the floor. She wanted to sweep them away, but something held her back. They were proof, a grave marker for the life she had buried. Her hand trembled as she traced the edge of the hearth, the rough clay scratching her fingertips. She whispered to herself, not sure if she wanted Jahlani to hear, I will never belong to debt again. He stirred, but he did not speak. His silence was not rejection. It was acknowledgement. The night pressed in deeper. The fire thinned to embers. She lay down, her back to the glow, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Her heart ached not with regret, but with the enormity of the road ahead. The world outside would not forgive easily. The council might turn hostile. Biko would not disappear. Her father's shame would curdle into something sharper. She had chosen, yes, but choices carried teeth. She closed her eyes, feeling the blanket heavy on her shoulders, and in the last whisper of fire, one question rose like smoke inside her. What would she have to sacrifice to remain free? The embers glowed faintly, and the hut settled into silence, holding that question for the dawn to answer. The girl arrived at dusk, stumbling barefoot through the trees, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her arms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold her body together. Her lip was swollen, one eye bruised, her breath ragged. She appeared at the edge of the clearing where the hut sat, smoke curling gently from its roof, and for a long moment she simply stood there, trembling, before her knees gave out. The sound of her collapse carried through the quiet. Amina dropped the basket of herbs she was sorting. She rushed forward, the girl's thin frame trembling under her hands. The bruises told the story before any words were spoken. Amina felt her stomach tighten with an ache she knew too well, an ache that lived in her bones and never fully left. She lifted the girl gently and carried her inside. The fire was already burning. Jahlani looked up, his brow furrowing at the sight. His silence spoke everything. He did not ask who the girl was, or why she had come, or what had been done to her. He simply moved aside so that Amina could lay her down near the hearth. A clay bowl of water was fetched. A cloth dipped. The girl's face was wiped clean of mud, though the bruises remained like shadows that refused to leave. Amina spooned rice into a bowl, blew on it, and placed it in the girl's lap. The steam curled upward, carrying the smell of comfort. For a moment, the girl only stared, wide-eyed and frightened, as though kindness itself was a trick. But then hunger broke through her fear. She ate quickly, tears falling between bites. Amina's chest ached. She had been that girl once, sitting in silence, afraid to believe that food could be given without demand. She remembered the first time Jahlani had left a bowl by her side, how suspicion had tangled with hunger until one gave way to the other. Now she repeated the gesture, her hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. "Rest," she whispered. "You are safe here." The word sounded strange, yet right, as though she were repeating a prayer passed to her through firelight. Outside, the sound of footsteps grew, but this time they were not heavy with threat. They were cautious, hesitant. When Amina stepped outside, she found a pair of women waiting in the shadows, each carrying bundles of cloth. One lowered her eyes and said, "We heard what you have done for her. We thought maybe we could help." Her voice cracked, but her hands were steady as she set the cloth down. The other woman nodded, her face tense, but her eyes alive. They disappeared before Amina could answer, leaving behind their offerings as if afraid of being seen. The hut began to change. Where once there had been silence and emptiness, now there was sound. Laughter of children saved from the river who returned to play by the clearing. Whispers of women who came under cover of dusk, bringing baskets of food, herbs, and news. Some stayed longer, seeking shelter from hands that struck them or words that cut. The hut swelled with life, its corners filled with blankets, bowls, the scent of stew, the rhythm of mending. At first Jahlani said little. He sat by the fire, sharpening his axe, his presence steady as the walls of the hut themselves. But even he began to shift. His silence was no longer only grief. It became space, for others to breathe, for voices long stifled to rise. The village began to murmur. Some called Amina shameless, said she had turned the woodcutter's hut into a refuge of disobedience. Others whispered differently. They spoke of a place where a woman could knock and be fed, where a girl could flee and not be dragged back. For every voice of contempt, another voice asked questions, and questions were seeds. The council met beneath the great tree. Men argued about shame and tradition, about bride price and obedience. But Malaika, the blind woman, stood again, her cane tapping the earth. Her voice rose above theirs. If the hut in the woods becomes a home for the broken, then perhaps it is not shame, but strength. Perhaps it is time we write laws not for cattle, but for souls. Silence followed her words. It was not agreement, not yet, but it was a silence of listening. Nights stretched long, filled with the smoke of cooking fires and the soft murmur of women sharing stories they had never dared speak aloud. Each tale was a thread, weaving into a fabric stronger than silence. And through it all, Amina moved quietly, carrying bowls, stitching torn cloth, wiping tears from cheeks. She did not speak of herself. She did not name her own pain. But in every gesture she gave back what had once been given to her, shelter without chains. Years passed like that. Seasons shifted. The hut aged but grew more alive, its walls stained with smoke, its roof patched with new reeds, its floor marked by countless feet. Children grew tall within its doorway. Women who had once come bruised and broken returned later with laughter and strength, their eyes brighter, their backs straighter. And then one evening, the sky bleeding gold into indigo, Amina sat on the porch beside Jahlani. Their hair had turned silver, their hands marked with years of labor. They did not speak much anymore. They did not need to. Smoke curled upward, carrying the scent of stew. From inside came the sound of children laughing, of women's voices rising in song as they prepared the evening meal. Amina leaned back, her eyes soft. She thought of the girl she had once been, standing in a wedding yard with the word "no" trembling on her lips, her parents turning away. She thought of Biko's hand across her face, of the shame that had followed her like a shadow, and then she thought of the firelight in this hut, of the letter she had burned, of the shirt she had once held against her chest. Her gaze drifted to the smoke rising. It curled into the sky, carrying everything: the pain, the loss, the choices, the small victories, turning them into something that lingered, invisible but unbroken. Jahlani's hand found hers, rough and warm. She squeezed back. Neither of them had children of their own. But the sound inside the hut told them they had birthed something greater. A place, a legacy, a future where silence was no longer a weapon, but a shelter. The twilight deepened. The forest hummed. Amina closed her eyes, listening to the laughter spilling from within, her chest swelling with both ache and peace. For the first time, she felt the weight of her journey settle not as a wound, but as a foundation. She had not been saved. She had not been owned. She had chosen. And in that choice, she had built a home that outlived her own body. The fire crackled, and her whisper slipped into the evening air, carried upward with the smoke. We are not alone anymore. And though the night answered with silence, it was a silence rich with promise, the kind that holds 100 voices waiting to speak. In every corner of life, there are wounds that ache quietly, carried in silence, until they weigh down the soul. Yet even the deepest scars can become the soil where new strength takes root. What was once broken can transform into something that shelters others, something that whispers to the weary, "You are not alone." The story reminds us that dignity does not come from wealth, titles, or tradition. It comes from the courage to say no when the world demands silence, and from the even greater courage to say yes to hope when despair feels easier. When people choose compassion over control, when they choose to stand beside one another rather than above, then community is born, not out of fear, but out of trust. Freedom, too, is not simply the absence of chains, but the presence of choice, the ability to shape one's own path, even when it is carved through hardship. There is no greater act of love than creating a place where others can rest without fear, where voices long stifled find their sound again, where laughter rises from the ashes of pain. And in this, a truth reveals itself. None of us walk alone. Every gesture of kindness echoes. Every act of courage multiplies. Every quiet decision to protect or to nurture builds a legacy that reaches beyond one lifetime. Just as fire can destroy, it can also warm. Just as silence can wound, it can also heal when filled with presence and care. The lesson is not only about endurance, but about transformation. How brokenness, once shared, can become belonging, and how darkness, once faced, can give birth to light. It is a call for all of us to remember, to listen, to see, to speak when silence would harm, and to open the door when someone trembling stands at its threshold. Life asks us not only to survive, but to become shelter for one another. And in doing so, we discover the kind of strength that cannot be bought, sold, or taken away. Thank you for walking through this journey with open hearts. If the story touched you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your reflections matter. And if you wish to join in more stories that explore the depths of humanity, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your presence here is not just support. It is part of the circle of voices that keeps these stories alive.